Joanna, let's talk about your findings briefly and what your recommendations are. It's always important to come up with real solutions, and people want to know how they can get involved in making those solutions a reality.
Judge Clopton, there are a number of federal and state reforms that we recommend in this report that Californians can get involved in pushing for, based on these ongoing evidence and information regarding barriers and discrimination here in California. So the first federal reform that we recommend is that Congress adopt a known discriminatory practices coverage formula in the new Voting Rights Amendment Act of 2014 to bring California within a new Section 5 federal preclearance protection and oversight structure before discrimination occurs, so that we can prevent it from happening, so that people don't suffer unnecessarily and then have to incur heavy costs and time spent bringing litigation after the harm has already occurred. It's clear that under the current Federal Voting Rights Amendment Act that is proposed in Congress, that it only looks at final judgments regarding voting rights violations. And if it only looks at final judgments, California would not be included. But there are a number of cases, and there are a number of filings that have been brought by the DOJ, given the 9 cases that were brought by the DOJ for language access violations, for example, that would not be counted in that assessment because they weren't final adjudications on the merits in a court of law. They were consent decrees. They were other types of decisions that were made. And again, the California Voting Rights Act, a lot of those cases have settled. A lot of jurisdictions have voluntarily converted.
What other federal reforms can we support?
Well, there's another provision of the Voting Rights Amendment Act that would require notice and disclosure before, as well as federal monitoring after any changes are made to election procedures and systems, so that Californians have access to that information before it's implemented. The other thing that can be done, as we were talking about earlier with Dorsey, to address the racial impacts of felony disenfranchisement laws is the reintroduction and the enactment of the Democracy Restoration Act at the federal level, and the introduction of a constitutional amendment at the state level, and maybe at the federal level, establishing an affirmative right to vote for all residents in the United States.
What exactly is the Democracy Restoration Act?
That was an act that was introduced in 2009 and also in 2011 by Representative John Conyers. It was also introduced this year. It has continued to be reintroduced, and it addressed the right of California, the right of any American that has had contact with the criminal justice system but who served their time to be able to have the right to vote in federal elections.
Let's talk about what we can do right here in our Golden State.
Yes. So the first thing we can do is strengthen the California Voting Rights Act. We already know it can address vote dilution and at-large systems, but what happens after these systems convert to district-based systems? What if they reduce the power of communities of color into smaller and smaller fractions? We need to address that here in California, and while we do have Section 2 of the Federal Voting Rights Act to do that, it's very expensive, very time-consuming to bring that litigation. What we're doing right now, there's a coalition of civil rights groups, Lawyers Committee, MALDEF, NALEO, Asian Americans Advancing Justice, the NAACP of California and Hawaii, that are working together to strengthen the California Voting Rights Act and enact new legislation that would expand protections for Californians under district-based systems that are experiencing vote dilution. And
what are the other state reforms?
So the other thing that can be done is, as we were talking about earlier with Dorsey, is to designate California probation departments, sheriffs, and other agencies such as county jails as voter registration agencies under the National Voter Registration Act. And as he was talking about under the Help America Vote Act, increase outreach to populations that have had contact with the criminal justice system. This would ensure that over 350,000 Californians, the majority of whom are of color, Latino, and African American, have the right to vote.
And what other kinds of things can we do that don't involve statutory change?
Well, we can update the online registration and voter information system here in California to find ways to identify eligible voters. There are an estimated 5.6 million Californians that are eligible to vote but that aren't registered. We could totally modernize our system that would be in compliance with existing laws under the Help America Vote Act.
And are there other things that the Secretary of State can do in terms of statewide standards?
Yes, adopt clear statewide standards for voter registration and poll worker training, including a cultural competency component so that things like voter suppression, voter intimidation, racial epithets and slurs are not being used by poll workers, and that they truly are providing valuable customer service as a civic duty and are respectful of every single voter and their right to vote.
We've used the term cultural competency several times throughout this program, but what does it really mean?
I think it means what Ted Jackson was referring to when you're saying you're really listening to people. That's the essence of democracy. You really treat a person as you would want to be treated. Cultural competency means you're sensitive to every voter's need.
Thank you so much for all of your hard work in this area and for conducting this study and writing a great report. We appreciate your participation in this program and for working with the League of Women Voters and the Lawyers Committee on Civil Rights, as well as the other organizations that were involved today in this wonderful discussion. For more information about the League of Women Voters of San Francisco and ways for you to get involved in our important work on voting rights, please visit our website at lwvsf.org. Or to find out more information about this important study on voting rights barriers in California, please go to lccr.com.